Um, so this is kind of an interesting moment in my career. I think we all go through different phases of our career, and I'm in that moment where you're kind of questioning everything, and I kind of feel like really good about it. I feel like I'm kind of on fire right now. Like I kind of see like this new like way that I'm coming to, and I can't quite see it all yet, but I'm going to kind of talk through some of that, and I'm going to tell you about why I'm on fire, and like why I'm going through some changes. Let me just start by actually introducing you to my class. I teach fairly large classes, 200 to 450 students. This is the small version here, and well, a couple of things about that. At Kansas State, we have like a 99% acceptance rate of students, and that's why I'm there. I actually love encountering students who haven't been lit up yet. I feel like it's kind of my calling to light them up and get them excited about learning. So that's what I get most excited about. Many of them first generation, and like I said, I mean, you know, you can go and you can teach like at a liberal arts college, and kind of they all get it already, right? But there's like real work to be done, and really exciting things happen in these students' lives as they unfold before you. So let me just tell you a little bit about the class. It's anthropology, which is the study of all humans in all times and all places. If you open up the textbook, there's the bold words would be things like ethnocentrism, cultural relativism, globalization, structural power, which is the idea that power can be embedded in structures, avunculocal resonance patterns, like all these different things about different people all over the world and how to understand them, right? So that's what anthropology is all about. And what I just told you is basically the answer to this question, which is what? And this is basically the way we all start teaching. We all think like the most important question is, what are you going to cover? And so we very, very carefully craft our syllabus to decide what we're going to cover. Or we go find the perfect textbook, and that's going to be what we're going to cover. And that kind of reigns over all of us. And one of the things I want to talk about today is actually how that is the wrong place to start. It's based on a faulty vision of what learning is all about, in which learning seems to be just about acquiring knowledge and memorizing it, rather than actually living into questions, for example, or it's just simply about job training and skill training, and not about inspiring wonder and curiosity. And ultimately, what I like to think of these days is I came across this quote from John Keats. John Keats was dying in the early 1800s. He had tuberculosis. He was only 25 years old, and he wrote a letter in which he was contemplating, like, what is this life about if I'm going to die at 26? And he decided that life was all about soul making, that all these trials that we go through and all these things that we learn are ultimately about making us a better soul. And that really stuck with me. I thought, that's what I'm trying to do. Like, I'm not just trying to teach a bunch of information to my students. I'm doing soul making. And that helped me really get a vision for what I'm up to. And covering just a bunch of information isn't what we need to do. So typically, we ask the question, what? And then we might ask the question, how? Like, you might try to get creative about how you're going to deliver the information. But you're still sort of trapped in that logic of the information is what matters. And then very rarely, but importantly, sometimes you ask why. And it'll be my contention that what we really need to do is start with why. What I mean by that is, why do we need to take an anthropology class at all? Like, what is the actual outcome that we're looking for here? Is it that we want them to know what avunculocal resonance patterns are? Or might there be something more important that avunculocal resonance patterns just helps them get at in some way? And I came to this, I've become very, very serious about studying the impact of my classes and studying my students and alumni. I've been interviewing alumni, surveying them. I sent out a survey. I have over 6,000 students now that I've taught over 10 years since I have these really big classes. I sent out a survey that went out to not all of them, but a very good sized sample. And one of the questions is, the first question on there is, how are you training or planning or currently doing a job like mine? Like, are you a professor of anthropology or training to be one? 0. Now, this is interesting because there's a lot of pressure on faculty, typically, and this sort of like ethos that you're supposed to teach as if you're raising them to be professors, just like you, right? And that's kind of the wrong way to go about this, obviously, based on that survey. And then I also did some other stuff on the survey. I asked, for example, how many of you are actually using specific information from my class in your daily lives? And then I put in parentheses, such as avunculocal resonance patterns. and the answer was 0. And then I asked, what are avunculocal resonance patterns? And nobody offered an answer. so like there's clearly something amiss there. And then in there, I have I do interviews with these alumni as well. And so just Monday, I had this amazing interview with one of my former students. He had taken my class 10 years ago. And I'm just kind of like probing in, like, what have you really taken from the class? What have you learned from the class? He's very successful. He's had a great life in some ways, and not so, and hard life in other ways. And this is what he said. He said to me, we can fish all we want for like what I learned about anthropology, and yes, like I have a more global perspective, and I'm less ethnocentric, and all those things. But he said it really wasn't about the anthropology. And then he said, look, 5 years ago, he was in love with this woman, and they had a child, and then she left him and took the child with her. And he said, all I could do was run. I took off my shoes, and I started running barefoot. I just wanted to feel the earth, and I just had to run. I've never felt like that in my life. And here I was running, and one day, as I was running, I could I kind of lifted up outside of myself, and I could see myself running down on the ground. And I had all this compassion well up for my own struggles. And I thought, my goodness, Kevin, you're a hero. And then I came back inside my body again, and I looked around, and I thought, everybody's been through hell on this earth. Like, everybody's been through some crap, and they're all heroes. And he had this immense, empathy grow for all these people around him. And then he said, that's what your class does for me. I thought, okay, that's soul making, and there's no assessment for that. there's no multiple choice exam to test that. And I thought, but that's what I want. That's that's what I hope that it would do for somebody. And so I started getting interested now, not just in the what, how, and why, but if we're going to talk about soul making, you also have to talk about who. And so I've started really paying attention to my students in ways that, in a depth that I hadn't paid attention to them before. And seeing them as souls in development and thinking about where are they at right now and what's happening in their lives. And so every day after class, since I had this epiphany a few months ago, I leave class at 10:45, the class gets over, and I say, okay, anybody wants to go to lunch with me, let's go. And people come to lunch with me. And so I just sit there with students, sometimes one-on-one, sometimes with a few. And if you come to lunch with me, the rule is, it's no holds barred, deep conversation, no small talk. So first question is I typically ask them, if your life were a book, what would be the chapter headings? And they give me the chapter headings. And then you just go into each chapter. And the last question is typically something like, if you're the hero of this book, why do people like you? Stuff like that. And these conversations typically often end with tears and a hug. These are deep conversations. And in this process, I've discovered that students are very interested in 4 questions. There's probably more, but so far I found 4. And one of them is, who am I? One is, what is the meaning of life? Another one is, what am I going to do with my life? And another one is, am I going to make it? And these are the 4 questions that seem to resonate. I'll just give you some examples of what these look like, because these are not just flittering questions. These are questions that burn in their soul. And I'll give you an example. So I'll start with the who am I. One student just a few weeks ago was telling me that she was raised Christian, has been very Christian her whole life, and now she's lost her faith. And her whole life she's been leader of church groups. She's leader of these student groups that meet and read Bible verses together and discuss them. And she's so afraid of telling her parents that she's no longer Christian that she keeps on going to these Bible groups and keeps on leading them. And at this point in her life, she's faked it for so long. Her words were, I faked it for so long, I don't know who I am anymore. And I'm afraid when I stop faking it, I won't know myself. She's asking that big question, who am I? Many other students are asking similar questions. They feel like they're faking it. They feel like a lot of students actually bring up Facebook and say, like, I have to like manage this perfect profile online, and I'm starting to get sort of burned out on faking it, and I don't know who I am anymore. So another student said, she's an accounting major. She's sitting there in my class, very good student. We go to lunch, and she starts telling me that 2 years ago she almost died. And I was like, what do you mean? And she said, well, my mom never loved me. My parents divorced. And my mom actually left when I was 17. And I was in the house all alone. And I didn't even know she had left, she said, because she was such an alcoholic that she like didn't come home a lot. And then all of a sudden she just stopped coming home, and the bills weren't paid. And next thing I know, I'm kicked out of the house, and I'm homeless. And I go to school, and I'm just kind of mad at the world. And I lash out at my English teacher. My English teacher takes me out in the hall, and she's crying. The English teacher is yelling at her, and the girl finally breaks down and says, I don't want to live anymore. That English teacher took her home with her that night. She's lived with her ever since. She graduated as valedictorian, and now she's an accounting major because she just wants a way out. She doesn't actually like accounting. She's just like in accounting because she thinks this is my way out. And she's wondering, like, she's really asking, what am I going to do with my life? That's what that question looks like when it burns in your soul. And then one other one I'll tell you about is the student who's like the best student in the class. She's just lit up. She's full of curiosity and wonder and all that stuff. She's done like 2 internships in Peru. She's applying for a Truman Scholarship. She's getting ready for a Rhodes. I mean, this is a top student. And she hands me a note at the end of class just 2 weeks ago. And it says, I need you to know something. She says, I know you think that I'm great, that I'm very organized and an overachiever. And she says, you need to know that I'm these things because my family is broken. I've come from a dysfunctional family full of addictions, and I'm afraid that my running towards achievement and organization, I'm running away from my family, but I'm afraid the dynamics are going to take me back into the same cycle, and I'm going to end up just like them. So she's wondering, am I going to make it? And it's not as simple as like, am I going to make money in my life? Am I going to be able to pay the mortgage? It's like, these are bigger questions than that. And that's what I mean by soul making. Like these are big, hard questions burning in their souls. And in some way, they connect back to what we're trying to do in a 4-year program. So here's a quick question. It's a quiz for you to catch you up on where we're at right now. Avunculocal resonance patterns, if you're paying attention. A, are they represented in bold type in textbooks to designate significant learning? Or B, safe ground upon which professors can demonstrate their conceptual mastery? C, allow professors to avoid more difficult questions and more significant learning? D, occur in 4% of the world's societies? Or E, all of the above? Then here we are. So, this world is actually obviously very changed, even from what it was, 15 years ago. This room, I know this room is brand new, but this whole campus is different than it was 15 years ago because there's literally stuff in the air. And this stuff, which looks like this, are the digital artifacts of about 3 billion people connecting and collaborating in ways they've never connected and collaborated before. And that also changes the whole dynamic in which we're teaching and learning. And let me just give you a sense of this. About 25 years ago, there was this guy, Seymour Papert. He's a mathematician at MIT. And he could see that the web was coming. Like he understood this. He was like a bit of a prophet himself. He was a fantastic thinker. And he was studying how kids learn. And so he was at a preschool with these 4-year-olds. And they found out that he was from Africa. And so they started asking him, like, oh, how do giraffes sleep? We've always wondered how giraffes sleep. They have these long necks. What do they do with that thing? And so they start, throwing out theories, like, well, do they rest it on the tree limbs? Do they fall over? Or can they get back up? All this stuff. And nobody knew, and he didn't know. And so then he went home that night, and he said, well, I had an advantage that none of them had. I had this wall of books. So he starts going through this wall of books, encyclopedias and whatnot, and he still couldn't find out how giraffes sleep. And then he sat there thinking, and he says, it won't be that long before these students will have access to something he called the knowledge machine. And what he meant by the knowledge machine would be like these simple devices that even 4-year-olds could slash their fingers around and use some gestures to call up any video or picture of, giraffes sleeping. And of course, he was right. And nobody, not too many people saw that coming back then, but he saw it coming. And of course, it's true, right? If you look up giraffes sleeping on YouTube, this is just on my own phone here, you get 56,000 hits. And you get, videos like this. Or if you don't like the videos, if you're more of a science type of person, you can go to Google Scholar and you can get these articles. Here you can see the paradoxical sleep pattern was recognized by the peculiar positioning of the head on the croup. And if you don't know what a croup is, you can go to Google Images and you can look it up. And if it's not immediately apparent, this is the croup. and so, like, this is indeed the knowledge machine, right? But as he pointed out, and this is very thoughtful of him to point this out, was that this knowledge machine will only work if you have questions. It only works if you have wonder and curiosity, and a lot of that is tied into this whole soul-making thing that I'm talking about. And if you don't have wonder and curiosity, this becomes the world's largest distraction device. So this is, it just like emphasizes how important it is, what we're trying to do. So now, if you look at student development theory and people who have studied student development, most first-year students come in with a certain vision of the world. And that vision is one based on the idea that there are answers. Everything's black and white, and my job is to get those answers and then learn those answers. And they get kind of like annoyed because their professors are constantly posing questions. And they think like, that's annoying, just tell me the answers. Stop posing questions. And then they start to discover, after maybe their second year or third year, they start to realize there are real controversies. That these professors are not just posing questions, these are real questions that maybe people don't actually know the answers to. But they still believe in answers, and they think that if only we knew enough or had the right theory, we would get to the answer. And then they discover, by their third or fourth year, that there are actual real ambiguities in the world. And these ambiguities are often in our own disciplines, like whatever you're studying, but they also apply to those really big questions that they're pondering. Things like, who am I? What am I going to do? Am I going to make it? Those are all unanswerable, ambiguous questions. You will live in the sea of ambiguity for the rest of your life because I'm sure most of the adults are wondering the same questions to this very day. But if we do our jobs right and we make good souls who are full of wonder and curiosity, they get to this point where they sort of transcend that ambiguity by appreciating it, by sort of embracing it, by seeing it as a growth, the space through which we grow. And that's what wonder looks like. And so this is the big goal then. How do we get students from here out to sort of a broader view full of wonder? So one thing I should point out here is that these little lines here, while they seem insignificant, are what I call learning worth crying about. Usually when you make a transition from one of these, it really messes with you. and often is through a crisis of some kind where you really start to rise out and broaden your views. So how do we do that in a classroom like this?